Who wants to talk about murder? This is not going to be a very fun video. So I wanted to talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I do not think that my voice is necessary to the discourse. There have been more than enough think pieces on the film's treatment of Bruce Lee and Sharon Tate and Brad Pitt and his genes, and whether or not Leo DiCaprio has ever eaten Mexican food in his life. It's a movie that, despite my best efforts to forget it, has really stuck with me, and I thought that I should maybe try and talk about it to the internet. Maybe it'll be like an act of maybe it'll be like, now I can forget it. Now that I've got it off my chest, I can, just move on with my life. I feel like my life can now be divided into two parts. The part before I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and everything that has come after. So here we go. Today we're going to talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood here on Cold Takes. I'm your host, Elise. Let's get into it. So, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a 2019 film by writer-director Quentin Tarantino, but you already knew that because you have been a human living on the planet Earth for the last, however long you've been on this Earth. If you have been on planet Earth, whether you are an alien or a human or anything in between, you have most certainly seen either the hype from this film or the actual film itself. So you already know what it's about. It's kind of tangentially about the Tate LaBianca murders, which were committed by members of the Charles Manson cult in 1969 in Hollywood. I have always been kind of fascinated with this crime because I am the world's biggest fraidy cat. I hate anything scary, and when I was a little kid, my dad used to love true crime TV shows. He used to love unsolved mysteries, so I was just kind of perpetually terrified of the prospect of being murdered, and the grislier the murder, the more my kind of like revulsion attraction meter just sort of like went out of whack. So I would want to know about the horrible thing, then scare myself with the horrible thing, and then it was just kind of a vicious cycle where I wanted to know more about the crime so that I could maybe try and make myself feel better about it and how it would never happen to me. But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized, oh, that person is just a normal person who got murdered, and I'm just a normal person and I could get murdered. For example, when I started to listen to the podcast My Favorite Murder, I got so scared. I couldn't stop listening to it. It was like an addiction. Like it was a rush to hear about these horrible things and be afraid of how they could happen to me. So I, every night before I went to bed, I had to check every single window and door in the house to make sure that they were all locked, because I remember that there was this one killer who would only go into houses if the doors were unlocked or the windows were unlocked, and he would just test doors randomly in his neighborhood and see if people were like welcoming him in to murder them, and that was terrifying. So I always had to go and check the windows and doors, and I would sleep with my bedroom door didn't lock, so I'd have to sleep with a pair of scissors on my bedside table, and I would wake up in the middle of the night and just be terrified that like that was the moment that I was going to be murdered. And eventually the man who would become my husband sat me down and said, "You cannot listen to this podcast anymore." And I was like, "Oh, it's just a podcast, it's harmless." And he's like, "No, it's not harmless, it is affecting your life." So because of that sort of murder obsession spiral panic thing that I went through, I know a lot about the Tate LaBianca murders. So when I heard that Quentin Tarantino, who is a director that I have a lot of complicated feelings about, was going to do a film on them, because in the beginning it wasn't really explained. It was just, oh, it's a movie about the Tate LaBianca murders. I was really afraid. I had this fear that it was going to be just a replaying of every nightmare that I had ever had, because, we know Tarantino's aesthetic. We know that the Tate LaBianca murders fit strangely square in the center of that intersection of fascination with gore and the kind of reveling in pain. And even as someone who is a huge fan, Inglourious Basterds is one of my favorite movies of all time, I was really worried. I was nervous. And for a long time I told myself I was not even going to go see it. But eventually I was like, no, I have to see it. Like I had faith that it was not going to end in the way that the actual Tate LaBianca murders did. And when I left the film, I was certainly very gratified to not have to see a very pregnant Sharon Tate and her very, innocent friends and a couple of, strangers get brutally murdered by members of a very sick and twisted cult. But that doesn't mean that I was happy with the way that the film actually went about portraying that story. I had been very hopeful that this film would kind of rewrite history in the same way that something like Inglourious Basterds did, and that didn't happen. Or it did, it kind of happened. If you have not seen this film, every spoiler, this video will be very spoiler heavy. It may not be very coherent, but it will be very spoiler heavy, and if you have not seen it yet, or you're not going to see it, or you don't want to be spoiled, please do not continue from this point on. I probably should have actually just done that at the beginning before I told you how the movie ended. Sorry. Tarantino kind of walks a very strange line in the fact that a lot of his films include very heavy depictions of a singular female story or one or two female characters, but they are very male dominated. So the narrative can kind of feel weighted in the favor of women, even if not very many women are present on screen. So I go back to Inglourious Basterds. I think it's one of the best examples of his work. Certainly one of the ones that more people have seen. And who doesn't love talking about killing Nazis? I sure do. In that film, you really only have two female characters, but because so much of the story is wrapped up in their emotional kind of arcs, it can feel weighted in the direction of women, even though there are very few women on screen. We have the same kind of issue here in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and to me, it gets really to the core of what I struggled with in this film in particular. So in this film, we have 5 central women or groups of women who are made present. First, we have the little girl who is on set with Rick Dalton. If you haven't seen the movie and you've seen the trailer, she's the one who comes up to him and says, "That's the best acting I've ever seen." Great impression of her. Thank you very much. In the film, she is given a really extensive, kind of long, weighty scene where she's talking to Rick about the books they're reading, their kind of respected stories, and about how she's a method actress and she doesn't like to drop character, and how she's very serious about her work. And sort of the interesting thing about this scene to me is that it functions to show how much of a better actress she is than Rick. Our main character, ostensibly our hero of this story. She is a very good actress. She's very dedicated, whereas he shows up to set drunk and out of sorts. We do see that he practices his lines very extensively, but he does still show up to work hungover and then drunk, and then has to kind of, beat himself up to get back into, kind of being Rick Dalton. But even that is more about being a movie star rather than being a good actor. We as the audience are shown that she's hands down a better actress than he is. The fact that she reverses and then is like, "Oh, it was the best acting I've ever seen," really rubs me the wrong way. It has nothing to do with my thesis for this video, but it does feel kind of like, ugh. Like there's something earlier in the film where one of the characters is talking to Rick Dalton, played by Leo DiCaprio, and he says, movies will do this, television will do this, where they bring in a heavy to show that like someone that the audience used to really love and respect, so that the hero can kind of beat up on them and show how much bigger they are than them. And to me, that was kind of what this scene with this girl was doing, how it was functioning was, she's like a really great actress, and she's so little, and she's so young, but she's so dedicated and smart, and then Rick shows her up, which then puts him at a higher status level, and it's a really weird interplay that I'm still not entirely sure I understand what Tarantino was trying to do with it beyond just showing how great Rick was. I hope there's more to it. If you have any ideas or insights, I would love to read it in the comments below. Maybe it has something to do with, Hollywood innocence, but really I haven't been able to parse it out for myself. Please let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts. Is that how you do engagement on YouTube these days? You just say, I don't understand a movie, please. Oh no. I just asked people to tell me in the comments what a Tarantino movie is about. Oh no. The men of the internet are gonna come and do that. I'm gonna leave it in. Let's do it. So yeah, so that's our first character in the film. She is this little actress that Rick Dalton has these scenes with. Again, she's not really central to my sort of thesis or problems with the films. It's just another example of how I think the film mishandles some of its female characters. Or maybe not mishandles. I think in the way that Tarantino is trying to make a movie and make this story, I think it's exactly how he wanted to handle it. I don't think he like bungled his own themes or thesis. It just, for me, it wasn't a successful storytelling choice. Is that fair? Yeah, that's fair. It's my video. I get to say how I feel. So the second two women who are kind of central to this film are the two wives. There are actually three wives, but I'm going to kind of put one away for a moment because she's not terribly important to the plot. So let's talk about Cliff's wife first. And Cliff's wife, I think, is the biggest sort of foil to Sharon Tate, who is really the central figure that I want to end up talking about. Cliff's wife is only shown in one sequence. And it's in a flashback sequence where the characters are debating whether or not Cliff killed this woman. Cliff is shown on a boat with a harpoon, listening to her in a very shrill, catty kind of stereotype of what a bad sitcom nagging wife is like. And the implication is, maybe Cliff didn't kill her, but would you blame him if he had? So because this film, most of its violence, graphic or implied, is committed against women, it does a lot with the question of blame. Like, do you blame the person who hurt this woman? Why or why not? Would you blame this person if they hurt this particular woman? Why or why not? And the fact that we are framing a nagging wife in the same way that we eventually will frame two of the Manson murderers is a bit tricky. So Rick's wife is an Italian film actress who he brings home when he is done with his sort of spaghetti western sort of phase of his career, and she is sort of an impenetrable, unknowable figure who visually is very closely aligned with Sharon Tate. To me, she's sort of portrayed as the other side of Sharon Tate's coin. She is framed almost in the exact same way, like when there are two shots of the two of them in bed that are framed almost the exact same way. They both snore, which is a very strange sort of choice. They are kind of these unknowable, untouchable, sort of imperfect, perfect beings who are framed very specifically by Tarantino to be linked. Now we come to the big sort of portion of our discussion today, which is about the Manson girls and Sharon Tate. I do not like referring to the Manson family as the Manson family. I don't like to refer to them as the Manson girls. What I prefer to do is call them the Manson cults. This is just a very little linguistic quirk of mine. I apologize if it confuses anybody, but when I talk about the Manson cults, that is who I'm talking about. They are... This is stupid. So yeah, so about halfway through this video, I realized I couldn't make it the way that I was going to make it originally. And so from what happens from here on out is how I had to make it. I couldn't make something shiny and perfect and polished about this movie, and about my feelings about it. So here, enjoy the rest of the video. So what I really want to talk about today, I really wanted to do like a big long video. I considered waiting until this movie was out and picking it apart with film and doing a proper film essay, and I still might do that. But what I really wanted to talk about today was the idea of manufactured perfection. This film seems to think that women are only worth saving if they are perfect or if they are unknowable. Rick's wife is an Italian film star who only speaks in her own language. I think she might have one or two lines in English and only really communicates through violence against one of the Manson family members who is attacking her. Sharon Tate is only given a handful of scenes, even fewer lines of dialogue, and in every single one of them, she is absolutely perfect. She is gorgeous, she is luminous, she is beautiful, she positions herself perfectly in the frame to just drink up all the light and reflect it back to you. I think Margot Robbie does just a beautiful job of performing perfection. But she is performing perfection. Sharon Tate in this film is not a real person. Sharon Tate in this film is a collection of pretty moments that would make you sad if she was murdered. And I think Tarantino was afraid that if he made her even the slightest bit human, that you wouldn't feel sad if she had died, or if he made her messy and complicated, you wouldn't be worried about what was going to happen to her at the end of the film. He seems to think that the only kind of woman who is worthy of being saved from a horrible, grisly fate is a perfect one, and that is kind of heartbreaking. It's really sad. Sharon Tate in this film is not a real person. She is a fairy tale. She really is the fairy tale princess of the Once Upon a Time that the title suggests, right? But the problem with fairy tales is that we don't care about the characters. When you read Cinderella in a book, you know that she's kind of a paper figure upon which you're meant to project yourself. And that's all well and good for a fairy tale when there's no real people involved and it wasn't a real crime and people weren't really impacted by it and people didn't lose their real lives and their real livelihoods and their real kind of belief in something real. But it's not so okay when it's about real people. I didn't actually expect to get this emotional about it. Wow, I'm sorry. I don't think Tarantino hates women. I think he certainly has blind spots that are troubling. And I think those blind spots kind of culminated in a perfect storm in this film. All of the characters who die or who almost die in this film are people that men would find annoying. Men get to be messy and complicated and they get to be their heroes. The women have to be one thing or the other. It makes me very sad that one of the only ways a lot of people will ever engage with Sharon Tate or Abigail Folger or Wojciech Frykowski or any of the people who are actually affected by this crime is through this kind of paper-thin image of them projected upon Quentin Tarantino's fairy tale fantasy of, Hollywood in the 60s. It's a beautiful film. It is gorgeously shot. It is a world that is immersive and complete. It's just a shame that its central character, the character who the film is ostensibly about, doesn't get to be as real as the rest of the world he's built. Tate once was asked in an interview what she would like to be in her next life. And I'd like to read you that quote now. "I'd like to be a fairy princess, a little golden doll with gossamer wings, in a dress adorned with bright, shiny things. Everything that's realistic has some sort of ugliness to it. Even a flower is ugly when it wilts, a bird when it seeks its prey, the ocean when it becomes violent. In some ways, I kind of respect that Quentin Tarantino sort of gave her her wish. In this next kind of reincarnation of Sharon Tate, she is a fairy tale princess, perfect and bright and shiny and gorgeous in every way, lovable, likable, endearing, and she gets her happily ever after. On the other hand, I still think Tarantino could have given us a real person. He could have let us be with Sharon. So like I said when I started this video, I think about getting murdered all the time. It is one of my biggest fears. It is one of my biggest anxieties. It kind of controls my life in some ways. And if I ever do get murdered, I now have a YouTube channel where everyone can watch me and see what I was like. And I hope that if they ever make a movie about my life, or if anyone ever contacts you for the, true TV story about the Elise Murray murders, I hope that you let them know and let them portray me as someone who was as messy and as complicated as I was in real life. Because that's the only way my death will be a tragedy. There is no tragedy in killing a perfect fairy princess because she's not real. There's nothing real about that or her. But there was something tragic about killing Sharon Tate. And I hope people, especially people who claim to love Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I do think there are things to love about it, I hope that they remember that there was real tragedy here. Not just a fairy tale.